I don't think anyone will ever say that's exactly what I wanted. And I better be careful, by the way, because for 7, I said in front of a crowd like you, I said no matter what we do, we can't please everyone. But I said there's no way you can make everybody go, oh, that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. But I loved everything in 7. Because when I sat down to read it, you should have seen me. What's the very first words in the crawl? Luke Skywalker has vanished. I said, oh, this is going to be good.
Hello, I'm Cinemod470, and my god, can you believe it's been 10 years since The Force Awakens premiered? Why do my bones hurt? Though the sequel trilogy as a whole has been branded with not unjustified vitriol.
Ray Skywalker.
Back when The Force Awakens premiered, there was a lot of positive fanfare for the movie. But after the trilogy ended and we got a clearer picture of the state of Star Wars under the Disney umbrella, people started to take off the nostalgia goggles and said The Force Awakens was just as bad as The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. But I think enough time has passed to get some emotional distance from the movie, so it can be judged analytically and fairly. And to make sure this retrospective stays that way, I will not be using outside sources such as novels, comics, and other transmedia to explain away any missing details in the plot, characters, or state of the Star Wars galaxy. I will be analysing those things in The Force Awakens alone, and use outside media only for comparison and context. And if you like what I do, hit the like button, comment your thoughts down below, and subscribe if you haven't. They cost you nothing, but for me, they tell the algorithm to push my content to more people. After Disney purchased Star Wars, every piece of media that wasn't the movies or the Clone Wars TV show was labelled non-canon. The main purpose of this was so the creative teams weren't forced to research multiple works when writing their scripts. And though I don't agree with that decision, I can understand why. Especially since George Lucas himself considered the transmedia that he didn't have a direct hand in as separate stories from his movies. And there were instances where the expanded universe would contradict itself and the films they were based on. I mean, hell, there were 2 different books released a year apart that depicted different versions of Han and Leia's wedding. So I imagine the desired outcome was to craft a narrative that could be seamlessly slotted into the tapestry of Star Wars without the added baggage from decades of stories. But an unintended consequence of this is that the expectations for Disney Star Wars would be raised higher, because not only were multiple ongoing stories and projects cancelled, the majority of Star Wars fans who liked the old canon found out that all their favourite characters and the stories associated with them no longer existed. Like Kyle Katarn, Mara Jade, Dash Rendar, Jason and Jaina Solo, Exar Kun, and the entire cast of both KOTOR games. So the new stories and characters replacing them had to be good enough to justify their existence over the old ones. Spoiler alert, they didn't. So, we finally got episode 7, something that George himself said would never happen because the Skywalker story was over.
What if someone else beside you came to you and said, I want to make episode 7? Could you see that happening?
No.
No, absolutely, positively, you're really closing the door without any wiggle room whatsoever.
Right. There is no episode 7.
Even for someone else to come up with.
Well, there's possibility there may be another offshoot movie somewhere about an offshoot character in that world.
But not episode 7.
But not about Luke Skywalker, not about that group of people and that struggle to bring democracy back to the galaxy.
But now that episode 7 is a reality, we can see the new Jedi Order that Luke created after the fall of the Empire. Oh, wait, no, they all died off screen before the movie started. Well, at least we can see what the New Republic is like. Oh, they all get blown up. Okay, but there's always a new villain faction for each trilogy, so it gives the writers a lot of creative freedom. Ooh, the First Order, they sound cool. I wonder what they're about. They're just the Empire again. Well, the old cast is coming back. It'll be great to see them all together again. And maybe they had children. It'll be cool to see them in a new family dynamic. Yeah, Han, Luke, and Leia are never in the same scene together. Han and Leia's son starts off as a villain. The only scene Ben Solo has with his father is when he kills him, and Luke is kept hidden until the end of the movie. You see, back in the day, there was still a present hatred for George Lucas in the prequel trilogy, so Disney's reaction to this hatred was to steer their projects away from that era and make their new movie resemble the original trilogy, more specifically, A New Hope. And I don't just mean in terms of aesthetics, I mean The Force Awakens copies the story beats and characters from A New Hope. We have a MacGuffin being carried by a droid that both the heroes and villains want, a protagonist that lives on a desert planet with a desire to leave for adventure, a villain in a black costume who has a history with the hero's mentor and is said to have brought about the destruction of the Jedi, and a weapon capable of blowing up planets that our heroes infiltrate and destroy. Unfortunately, copying A New Hope's story doesn't work when writing a new chapter in a saga that spans 6 movies, because the plot has to account for what came before. That includes the in-universe history and continuity. Plus, there were specific reasons for why particular story beats in A New Hope happened. The reason Leia was captured over Tatooine was because she was looking for Obi-Wan on her way to Alderaan, and the Empire had intercepted the transmission containing the Death Star plans. The reason Luke came into possession of R2 and the Death Star plans was because Obi-Wan was watching over him. Plus, Luke's Uncle Owen needed to buy new droids, and the Jawas capture any that wander alone in the desert. The reason why Vader didn't look for the plans himself was because he was interrogating Princess Leia to find the rebel base and had delegated the search to one of his underlings. And the reason the Empire found the rebel base for the climax was because they were tracking the Falcon after it had fled the Death Star. Whereas in Force Awakens, these repeated story beats can be explained with 2 words: just cause. The Resistance decides to have a clandestine meeting on Jakku to give the map to Poe instead of anywhere in New Republic space, just cause. Rey comes across BB-8 and the map to Skywalker, just cause. Kylo stays on his ship and doesn't look for the map on Jakku after Poe escapes capture, just cause. And the First Order manages to find the Resistance base, you guessed it, just cause. I notice when people critique The Force Awakens copying A New Hope on YouTube, there's a clip they cite from Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the writers of South Park, Team America, and the Book of Mormon, where they discuss story structure.
We've found out this really simple rule that maybe you guys have all heard before, but it took us a long time to learn it. But we can take these beats, which are basically the beats of your outline, and if the words "and then" belong between those beats, you're f***ed, basically. You got something pretty boring. What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word therefore or but, right? So what I'm saying is that you come up with an idea and it's like, okay, this happens, right? And then this happens. No, it should be this happens and therefore this happens. But this happens, therefore this happens. And that, as soon as we are able to, and literally sometimes we'll write it out to make sure we're doing it. We'll have our beats and we'll say, okay, this happened, but then this happens, and that affects this, and that does to that, and that's why you get a show that feels like, okay, this to that, to this to that, but this, here's the complication, to that. And there's so many scripts we read from new writers and things that we see.
God, I see movies.
And
you see movies that you're just watching, and it's like, this happened, and then this happens, and then this happens. That's when you're in a movie just going, what the f am I watching this movie for? Just like, this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. That's not a movie, you know, that's not a story. Like Trey said, it's those 2, but, because, therefore, that gives you the causation between each beat, and that's a story.
See, the thing is, no matter what the Disney apologists say, The Force Awakens is not an homage to Star Wars. It's lazy, because it didn't even bother to try and make the narrative have an interconnected flow between scenes. It instead banked on the spectator's nostalgia for a better movie by replicating it. In fact, The Force Awakens' narrative is so weak, it can be broken with one question. Why is there a resistance? The reason JJ made a resistance was to replicate the underdog narrative of the original trilogy with the rebels. But the reason the rebels were underdogs was because the Empire were in charge of the galaxy, had the technological advantage, and dwarfed them in terms of size, while the rebels were using whatever gear, manpower, and resources they could scrape together. But here's the thing, the Empire doesn't control the galaxy at this point, and the Resistance is being funded by the New Republic. So this underdog narrative doesn't fit. And for those who are wondering why the New Republic didn't send its own army to fight the First Order directly, that question isn't answered at any point in the trilogy. It is, however, answered in the Bloodline book. Basically, the New Republic had reduced its military since the war with the Empire, and when the First Order emerged, the Republic had become complacent and didn't recognize them as a threat. Mind you, I'm not advocating for this method of duct taping shoddy storytelling, I'm just providing context The Force Awakens doesn't. Here's my problem as a Star Wars fan. Even if the New Republic reduced its military, what about individual planets and systems? Going by the few works of Star Wars that were still canon at the time of Force Awakens release, there was a period of time where 2 generations of certain systems endured 2 different military occupations, one by the Separatist Alliance and the other by the Empire. And yet they didn't create their own military to defend themselves if they were ever invaded again? What about the planets that used to be Separatists? The reason they seceded from the Galactic Republic was because they believed it was corrupt. And hindsight being 2020, it was, considering a Sith Lord was in charge and turned the democracy into an empire. The leadership of the Separatists may have died, but the First Order came from the remnants of the Empire, so it's hard to believe that the Separatist ideology died out. And I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be okay with the Empire making a comeback with a new identity, and neither should the New Republic. The reason the Galactic Republic didn't have a military was because there was a literal millennium of peace before the Clone Wars, and whatever small disputes did happen were resolved by that planet's militia and the Jedi Order. But the Jedi Order is dead, and the new one was apparently still in its infancy since Kylo Ren was able to destroy it. So it seems really ridiculous that the New Republic would be so lax in its defense considering the galaxy's recent history of war and the origin of who their current enemy is. Plus, this idea of the New Republic being incredibly naive to the First Order's threat to the galaxy is still a hard pill to swallow 10 years after The Force Awakens premiered, especially with Disney claiming ownership and finishing the Clone Wars and releasing shows like Rebels, Bad Batch, and Andor. Because these shows feature characters like Cham Syndulla, Saw Gerrera, and Bo-Katan Kryze, who all fought in both the Clone War and the Galactic Civil War, and represent the long struggle many people went through fighting to free their planets only for the Empire to take them over. And with The Mandalorian and Ahsoka taking place after Return of the Jedi, and depicting how even the remnants of the Empire could be a threat to the New Republic, it's very hard to believe that the government the heroes put together wouldn't be doing everything they could to prevent another evil power taking over the galaxy. And speaking of evil power, despite being a remnant of the Empire, the First Order immediately start the movie with a fleet, a spy network, and a planet version of the Death Star, with absolutely no explanation of how they got them. I know this sounds like a nitpick, but previous Star Wars movies did take the time to explain why certain factions were able to amass large armies and resources, giving the fictitious conflicts a sense of realism. And since the First Order just had its own Death Star that's built into a planet, it breaks the critical spectator's immersion. Because if the First Order had the manpower and resources to build it, the question of why the New Republic didn't think the First Order was a serious threat gets raised. And when comparing Starkiller Base to the Death Star, you can clearly see how little thought was put into it. The Death Star was a well-kept secret that took years to build, and could only be used after the Emperor had removed the Senate and replaced it with his own bureaucracy. This way no political power could depose him, and the terror of the Death Star would keep the galaxy complacent. And the Death Star was presented as this new kind of superweapon that had a destructive power the galaxy had never seen before. And this build-up wasn't due to Rogue One and Andor's contributions. The threat it posed and finding a way to destroy it was the entire plot of A New Hope. Whereas in Force Awakens, since the plot is centered around finding Luke, Starkiller Base literally comes out of nowhere. Especially since the First Order had the base ready to fire, and the Resistance was able to come up with a plan to destroy it in less than 3 minutes. Just cause. So it's really hard to take it seriously. Also, does Starkiller Base move? I mean, it has to, right? Because it gets its destructive power from absorbing a star, but when they shot at the Republic, there was a sun in the sky. And Finn knew the base's location, so does it drain suns from the same system? But what do they do when they run out? Can Starkiller Base move through hyperspace? Can a planet and the people on it survive moving through hyperspace? The movie also says the laser goes through hyperspace, so the base wouldn't have to get into a specific position to fire at a target, but if that's the case, how does the laser almost instantaneously hit its target when the shortest distance would be a few hours? For those of you who find these questions just as perplexing as I do, this one line should clear everything up.
We're not sure how to describe a weapon of this scale.
Translation: there was no thought put in to make Starkiller Base make sense. In fact, most of the work put into explaining how it operates and where it came from is in outside sources after the movie premiered, which is not excusable for JJ's negligence. I understand the impulse of making a planet into a Death Star, it's a cool concept, but the rule of cool can only suspend disbelief for so long until the spectators take the time to stop and think critically about what they're watching. But that begs the question, how does one keep the spectators from stopping to think about what they're watching? Make sure the movie doesn't stop. You see, The Force Awakens rarely takes a moment to sit still and be quiet to let the spectators soak in what they're watching. It's always action scene, action scene, action scene, something explodes, someone gets boarded, cut to the next scene. One example is the cantina scene. In A New Hope, we took our time in the cantina, taking in all the different aliens, the music, and getting a sense of how diverse the galaxy is as Obi-Wan and Luke search for pilots to get them off-world. In The Force Awakens, however, the camera flies towards the person they want to talk to, and we only get a couple of cuts of the people present before they get snitched on and we move on to the next scene. The next example is the destruction of the Republic. After the planets blow up, we get maybe 5 seconds to reflect on the loss that occurred before the First Order arrives, and we get another action scene. The plot moves so fast they expose Kylo's identity in Act 2.
The droid we seek is aboard the Millennium Falcon, in the hands of your father, Han Solo.
And in case you didn't hear it properly, they give it away on multiple occasions.
Show me, grandfather.
I saw him. Leia, I saw her son. He was here.
And Han Solo, you feel like he's the father you never had. He would have disappointed you.
Which is weird because I get the feeling earlier versions of the script wanted Ben's identity to be a twist at the climax, especially when analysing the dialogue between Han and Ben before the helmet comes off. The intensity Han puts on the words, "my son," and Finn and Rey's reaction to this revelation.
The face of my son.
Another consequence of this fast-paced storytelling is that there are very few quiet moments between the characters to build their relationships. Poe and Finn become best friends right after meeting, and Han becomes Rey's mentor immediately after learning her name. So their relationships feel artificial since they're not given the quality of time to build up because there's a high-stress situation going on and we've got to move on to the next scene. When Han is murdered by his son, we only care because we know who Han is through the original trilogy. But when we see Rey crying her eyes out, we can't empathize with her because Han and Rey's time together hasn't been that meaningful. Though I will say, this speedrun method of storytelling is helpful when covering up the plot conveniences, like how BB-8 found Rey in the desert, how Finn found Rey in the desert, how they both found the Millennium Falcon, how Han almost immediately found them, and my personal favourite, when R2-D2 reactivated after the battle was over for dramatic effect. What made The Force Awakens stay in the spectators' minds despite the realisation of it being a rehash of A New Hope was JJ's use of the mystery box in his plot.
What are stories but mystery boxes? There's a fundamental question. In TV, the first act is called the teaser. It's literally the teaser. It's the big question. So you're drawn into it. Then, of course, there's another question, and it goes on and on and on. I mean, look at like Star Wars. You got the droids. They meet the mysterious woman. Who's that? We don't know. Mystery box, you know. Then you meet Luke Skywalker. He gets the droid. You see the holographic image. You learn, oh, it's a message. You know, she wants to, find Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's her only hope. But who the hell is Obi-Wan Kenobi? Mystery box. So then you go, and he meets Ben Kenobi. Ben Kenobi's uncle is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Holy shit, So it keeps it. Have you guys not seen that? It's huge. Anyway.
A mystery box, according to J.J. Abrams, is a storytelling method to create suspense and the idea of infinite possibility, so long as the spectators don't have all the details in the plot. because so long as there isn't a definitive answer, the answer can be anything. And for a while, it worked. After The Force Awakens premiered, there were hundreds of theories online about why Luke went to the first Jedi Temple, why Rey was so powerful, and why Kylo Ren fell to the dark side. And the biggest mystery was Supreme Leader Snoke. Now, Snoke is a mystery box character because his backstory is never revealed and his intrigue is tied to the audience's speculation. Two good examples of mystery box characters are V from V for Vendetta and Joker from The Dark Knight. We never know V's real name, backstory, or what he looks like. And though there are hints to his previous life, it isn't important, because V represents the idea of revolution, and him being faceless illustrates that the idea can come from anyone. When it comes to the Joker, though he has an inconsistent backstory, he represents the idea of chaos. And Joker's fight against Batman isn't because one's a hero and one's a villain, it's for the soul of Gotham, as Joker is trying to push the citizens to insanity and prove that the rest of the world is as bad as him. Because the spectators never know either of their backstories, they grab onto whatever hints are dropped and use their imaginations to create whatever they want. And that's okay, because their backstories remaining unknown are in-universe mysteries, and the main focus is what their personas represent. Snoke, however, doesn't have this luxury, because he's part of a franchise with an established history. Snoke is supposed to represent this era's Emperor Palpatine, but like the Resistance, Snoke's existence raises questions that can't stay a mystery without him becoming a living contrivance. Ignoring the rise of Skywalker for the moment, because Snoke appears quite old and is portrayed to be extremely powerful, the question gets raised if both he and Palpatine were alive at the same time at some point. And if they were, that raises further questions. Like, did Palpatine know of Snoke's existence? Did they fight each other? How did Snoke stay hidden for so long, considering darkside users tend to be very domineering with their strength, and are notorious for preventing rivals from overpowering them? Though these questions staying unanswered allows Snoke's backstory to be anything, his backstory being ambiguous can be argued to be lazy writing from a continuity perspective. Because in the Force Awakens case, a mystery box is a Schrodinger's cat. Until the box is open, the cat has the potential to be both alive and dead. And until the mystery box is opened, the contents have the potential to be both satisfying and disappointing. But never opening the box either means the cat will eventually die, or there was no cat in the first place. Since later interviews with J.J. Abrams confirmed that there was no set plan for the sequel trilogy, and Colin Trevorrow was originally announced to direct Episode 9, J.J. clearly had no intention of making any answers to the mysteries, but instead left it for other people to work out. And since The Force Awakens' appeal was banked on mystery boxes, the mysteries make the movie age like milk. Since Luke went to the first Jedi Temple to die, Kylo turned to the dark side because Luke had zero chill, and Rey was so powerful just cause. And later it was retconned that the power came from being Palpatine's granddaughter.
You are a Palpatine.
Bullshit!
When it comes to The Force Awakens' treatment of Han, Luke, and Leia, though the cinematography treats them with reverence, the script wastes them. Their appearances are set to certain milestones in the movie. Han appears at the start of Act 2, Leia appears at the start of Act 3, and Luke appears at the conclusion.
You know all that workout where you lost all the weight? You're gonna have to turn and remove your hood. I thought, oh, I gotta lie down for a minute.
This is likely to whet the spectators' appetites and keep them engaged. But we never get the chance to see them all together in one scene, and we never will. And the movie could have used Luke and Leia to get a point of view of the current state of the galaxy. Leia could have given us insight on how the New Republic operates, and Luke could have shown us how his Jedi Order is different to the one before the Purge. But since neither of those things were present in A New Hope, and anything that references the prequel trilogy is taboo to Disney, Luke instead loses his new Jedi Order and is hidden away from the galaxy so he can't help the heroes, and Leia is the leader of a new rebellion while the Republic is barely mentioned and later blown up. Though Han has the most screen time, his character suffers the most, as the script regresses him to the smuggler he used to be in A New Hope. Because after his son turned to the dark side, Han went back to smuggling because he says that's all he's been good at. I've noticed there's been a critique on Han Solo throughout the years, saying he was never a hero, just a smuggler who joined the fight because he was paid.
Everybody loves Han Solo. Rebel, rule breaker, lone wolf, but to my old-fashioned sensibilities, he's not a hero. He's just a guy who always puts himself first.
But here's what those people in JJ forgot. Han developed as a character. He went back to help Luke destroy the Death Star, even though he had been paid. Han went out to save Luke from the snowstorms of Hoth, even though he was about to leave since there was a bounty on his head until he paid off his debt to Jabba. When Han thought he might die from carbonite freezing, he told Chewie it was more important to keep Leia safe. Then after he got out of carbonite, Han led the mission on Andor. And when Leia went missing, Han put the mission on hold until she was found. But in Force Awakens, after Han's son turns to the dark side, destroys the new Jedi that's run by his best friend and brother-in-law, and joins the new Empire, Han decides to go back to smuggling, instead of, I don't know, going out to look for him and bring him home. Nope, just goes back to smuggling. Though Han creates the front of an uncaring gunslinger, it is, nonetheless, a front. Because he is consistently shown to have an unwavering loyalty to his friends and those he loves, and will put their safety above his own. And I will never buy the idea that Han Solo wouldn't drop everything to bring his son home. Now that we're done with the old cast, let's start with the new. Finn is a stormtrooper who, after experiencing conflict for the first time and losing one of his comrades, realizes what he's doing is wrong and wants to run from the First Order. So, with the help of Poe, he escapes to Jakku, meets Rey, and joins the Resistance. Personally, I think Finn has the best character arc in the movie, because he starts off a coward, as he knows what the First Order have in their arsenal, and he thinks they can't be beaten. And when Rey is captured, Finn sets his fears aside to save her, and he risks his life and spine to defend Rey's unconscious body from Kylo. Though Finn has a good character arc, it's not without issues. The biggest one being he originally worked sanitation on Starkiller Base and had never seen combat before, which is why he was so traumatized from the battle and deserted.
On my first battle, I made a choice. I wasn't gonna kill for them, so I ran.
And it's an issue because it leads to so many other questions that unravel his whole plot. Like, why did the First Order bring a soldier who's never seen combat on the mission to find the map to Skywalker, the guy everyone says can beat them? And since Hux himself stated that all the stormtroopers were taken as children and indoctrinated to serve the First Order, why make Finn work on sanitation instead of using a droid? Now, if the First Order was represented as a small faction, it would make sense that Finn would have multiple duties if they didn't have the numbers they used to. But that excuse goes out the window since the First Order has the resources to build an even bigger Death Star. The second issue is that Finn is too comedic.
Why are you helping me? Because it's the right thing to do.
You need a pilot.
I need a pilot. Okay, stay calm, stay calm.
I am calm.
I'm talking to myself.
So you're with the Resistance?
Obviously. Yes, I am. I'm with the Resistance, yeah. I am with the Resistance.
You hurt Chewie, you're gonna deal with me!
Hurt him? He almost killed me 6 times! Which is fine. You remember me?
FN 2187.
Not anymore. The name's Finn, and I'm in charge. I'm in charge now, Phasma. I'm in charge. Bring it down. Bring it down.
Now, Star Wars is no stranger to humor, but the best humor came from the characters' personalities bouncing off each other. And it didn't clash with the narrative's intended tone, because the characters knew when to get serious. And Finn being a clown for half his screen time clashes with the drama of being a stormtrooper, breaking his conditioning and fleeing the First Order. And while we're on the subject of the First Order, The Force Awakens doesn't explore the complexities of stormtrooper indoctrination. Every trooper has the same story as Finn. They were taken from their families as children and conditioned to fight. Yet, all our heroes, including Finn, continue to fight and kill stormtroopers, even though it's been established they're all brainwashed. In the original trilogy, they never really addressed the mentality of the stormtroopers, but it was eventually confirmed that they were enlisted soldiers. And in the prequels, the bad guys were droids programmed for combat. So, there wasn't really that much of a moral conundrum when it came to fighting and killing them, because they were willing participants in the conflict. In Force Awakens, however, Finn's entire story begins from him witnessing a comrade die, which breaks his conditioning. But he never has any issues killing other stormtroopers or brings up the fact that they were all brainwashed and are technically fighting against their will. This is what we high society cinephiles call narrative dissonance, where a character's actions clash with the narrative. Though Finn being a stormtrooper makes him stand out in the roster of Star Wars characters, the movie doesn't make the effort to explore every avenue that plot point could lead, because it still wants the stormtroopers to be evil, faceless cannon fodder. Poe Dameron is the sequel trilogy's ace pilot and Finn's best friend, but he wasn't intended to be. Originally, Poe was supposed to die when he and Finn crashed on Jakku, but because Oscar Isaac died in his previous movies, he convinced JJ to keep Poe alive. And his return isn't exactly believable, because in the span of a day, he was thrown from the crash and managed to get from the desert of Jakku through space to Resistance HQ just in time for him to help Finn and Han. Though I will say in Poe's defense, unlike Finn, he actually strikes the balance of being comedic without undercutting the tone of the narrative. At least not too much. The introduction between Poe and Kylo does undercut the harrowing moment of Poe witnessing a man being executed, but other than that, Poe's humor is presented more as a defense mechanism when he gets captured, and when the situation is dire, he acts serious. All in all, I think Poe is an okay character. And on that positive note, let's talk about Rey. And let me begin by saying her introduction was good. Unlike the rest of the movie where there's loud dialogue or action to maintain the audience's attention, Rey doesn't have any dialogue, so the spectators can take in visually her daily routine, get an idea of her life and struggles on Jakku, and how long she's been there. There's this one scene in particular that says so much with so little, where Rey is cleaning one of the scraps she picked up, and across from her is an elderly woman. And Rey's expression conveys how she fears that this will be her future, that she'll never leave Jakku and will be doing the same routine until she's old and grey. In fact, Daisy Ridley's acting throughout the movie is on point. I don't think there's ever a moment where her face ever looks expressionless. I know that should be the bare minimum for actors, but nowadays the bar is on the floor. But going back to the introduction, we get an easy understanding of what Rey trades the components for: portions of food. And because of how little she consistently gets, there's a moment where we think she might sell BB-8 when she's offered such a large amount. Since we don't know Rey's full personality at this point, and only the hardships she endures, we can really feel the weight of her decision. But now we've got to get to the big question. Is Rey a Mary Sue? For those who don't know, the term originated from the 70s Star Trek fanfiction A Trekkie's Tale by Paula Smith, where 15-year-old Lieutenant Mary Sue becomes immediately well-liked among the original series cast, manages to escape capture from green androids, and runs the Enterprise while everyone is suffering from an unknown disease. Mary Sue ran the ship so well, she got every commendation that exists. Eventually she dies from the disease, and the original cast are so grief-stricken, they make her birthday a national holiday. You see, the fanfic was a parody of fanfiction tropes, specifically making self-insert original characters that are well-liked among the canon characters and can solve any problem they face. And when looking through the entire sequel trilogy, yes, Rey is a Mary Sue, just not a parody. But for this video, I want to focus on Rey in Force Awakens and see if that label came about because of her subsequent movies. When it comes to Rey's in-universe likability, every morally good character likes her almost immediately after meeting. Finn, BB-8, even Leia hugs her when they first meet and completely ignores Chewie because they were both sad about Han's death. And in the same scene where Han learns her name, he offers her a job. When it comes to Rey's skill set, and if she's immediately great at everything, let's take a look at her background. Being a scavenger would make her great at climbing, since she has to climb Star Destroyers on a daily basis. It's also possible that her background as a scavenger gives her an understanding on ship components and makes her tech-savvy. Considering her livelihood was based around trading ship parts, and she only has a finite amount of carrying space, I can imagine Rey knows what each component is and what they're worth. So being able to make repairs on the fly, hack door controls, and bypassing a compressor that was modded into the Falcon isn't outside the realm of possibility. As for Rey speaking multiple languages, I'd imagine she'd be fluent with whatever was common on Jakku, but when it comes to Shiriwook, it's only spoken by Wookiees, and I don't think Rey would have had any conversations with them since the only person she deals with is Onkar Plutt. When it comes to Rey flying the Falcon on her own, I'd say that's a yes in the Mary Sue column, because though Rey starts to have some difficulty flying the Falcon without a co-pilot, she's later able to outmaneuver TIE fighter pilots while flying through crashed Star Destroyers without so much as scratching the paint. And the fact that Rey knows how to fly at all is called into question because of the whole plot point of her not leaving Jakku despite clearly wanting to. I get that Rey's waiting for her parents to return, and deep down she knows they're not coming back. But since she knows how to fly, her denial feels a little inconsistent considering how long she's been waiting and her desire to return to Jakku after escaping the First Order because she still believes her parents will return. Also, when would Rey have the time to learn how to fly? Especially when her daily schedule is pretty well established. To be fair, New Hope had a similar problem with Luke where everyone said he was a pilot prodigy, but we never see him fly till the Battle of Yavin. But him learning how to be a pilot tracks with his desire to leave Tatooine. Finally, there's Rey's strength in the Force, being able to resist Kylo's mind probe, mind-tricking the Stormtrooper to escape, and then overpowering Kylo in their duel, all without training.
I'll tell you where I thought I came in. In the forest, when the lightsaber goes like this and flies off, I said, oh, what a great entrance. Ah! Rey caught it? She hasn't even been to Dagobah for training. What's the deal?
Now, when it comes to Kylo and Snoke's reaction to her power, there is a clear disbelief as this is completely abnormal. And Daisy Ridley herself stated in an interview back in 2020 that the writers were toying with the idea of her being a Kenobi. So it's possible they were trying to give a believable explanation to Rey's power level. But eventually her parents were revealed to be no one to subvert expectations, and she was so powerful just cause. And then after the backlash of The Last Jedi, they made her a Palpatine. But in the context of The Force Awakens alone, I think Rey's unnatural strength comes from the fact that JJ just didn't understand how the Force worked. Because there's a line from Kylo saying she'll become stronger the more she realizes her power.
She's just beginning to test her powers. The longer it takes to find her, the more dangerous she becomes.
To which I say,
that's not how the Force works.
Star Wars has consistently made it clear that no matter how powerful a person is with the Force, they still need training to utilize it. Anakin and Luke were powerful, but they were beaten by Dooku and Vader because they had a lifetime of combat experience. Even Ezra Bridger, a Disney Star Wars character, needed training, and Rebels premiered a year before The Force Awakens. Going back to Kylo's defeat, I've often heard that Rey's victory was justified because of his injuries from Chewie and Finn, but they omit the moment when Rey's on the back foot and she enters some kind of positive Force state and doesn't just beat Kylo, she overpowers and humiliates him. One explanation I've heard was that Rey used the dark side to beat Kylo because of her true heritage, but I seriously doubt that for 3 reasons. 1. The earlier line from Kylo creates the context that Rey has discovered her inner strength. 2. Rey being a Palpatine wasn't canon till years later. And 3. The music playing when Rey enters her Zen state doesn't match the iconic tone of the dark side. Plus, Lucas has been very clear that the ability to use the Force doesn't improve one's skill with a lightsaber, it enhances physical strength alone. When comparing this scene to when Luke destroyed the Death Star, him using the Force wasn't making him fly better. He used the Force to expand his senses to know when to fire, and while he was training with Obi-Wan, that's what his lessons were about, learning to let the Force guide his actions. But Rey doesn't have any Force-related training aside from this one conversation with Maz Kanata, and yet she manages to move through Act 3 on God mode. So yeah, intentional or not, Rey is an unironic Mary Sue. And we as spectators aren't invested in her journey because we know she'll breeze through her trials and tribulations since she was able to demolish Kylo. Honestly, I think it would have been better if the fight ended with Rey and Finn narrowly escaping Kylo so his fear factor isn't reduced, which I'll get into more later. Or better yet, instead of making Rey a scavenger, make her a Jedi from Luke's order, either later into her training or freshly knighted. That way her proficiency with the Force is more believable and it offers her the room to keep growing. Now let's take a look at the dark side of The Force Awakens. And the best character to start with is Captain Phasma. Ever since Boba Fett's first appearance, Star Wars has been creating characters who act as the main underling with a unique eye-catching design. Kind of like how in James Bond movies there's that one henchman with the iconic gimmick for killing people. And Captain Phasma is Disney Star Wars' first try. And Phasma does have a unique design that makes her stand out among the other stormtroopers. But the characters she's emulating weren't just aesthetically pleasing, they were integral to the plot of their respective movies. Boba Fett was the bounty hunter who found the Millennium Falcon and delivered Han Solo to Jabba. Jango Fett was the template for the Republic's clone army. Darth Maul killed Qui-Gon Jinn, and his defeat made Obi-Wan a Jedi Knight. And General Grievous was the greatest general of the Separatists, and their downfall began because of his death. Whatever their quality, those characters can't just be plucked out of the story without drastically changing the narrative. And Phasma is very inconsequential to The Force Awakens, and could be replaced by a basic stormtrooper. She doesn't have an epic fight scene, she's not an active participant in the hunt for the map to Luke, she isn't that much of an antagonist to Finn even though she was his superior officer, and her supposed demise doesn't really affect the First Order. We don't even witness it happen. There's just a throwaway line about a trash compactor and we move on. And she's voiced by Gwendolyn Christie from Game of Thrones fame. Captain Phasma is probably the third biggest waste of the movie, right after Luke and Leia. When it comes to General Hux, he's obviously this movie's version of Tarkin, though his relationship with Kylo Ren is surprisingly different compared to Tarkin's relationship with Vader. Because Tarkin was depicted as Vader's superior, whereas Hux and Kylo appear to be on the same level in terms of chain of command, so they tend to butt heads often in an attempt to gain leverage and superiority over each other. That being said, their rivalry doesn't get explored enough, and Hux for the most part is pretty forgettable. So forgettable that I only remembered to add his analysis on the third draft of this video's script. I think the reason he's so forgettable is because Force Awakens is putting more emphasis on characters like Kylo and Snoke. So aside from the big speech he makes before Starkiller Base fires at the Republic, Hux doesn't get much room to stand out. Though to be fair, Domhnall Gleeson is acting with his full chest in that scene. In comparison, Tarkin is able to stand out in A New Hope because he is the main big bad for that movie, as the Emperor is kept off screen and Vader takes orders from Tarkin. And what made Tarkin so memorable as a villain was that he represented the Empire's mentality, cold, evil, and overconfident. What also makes Tarkin superior to Hux is when comparing the scenes where they fire their respective Death Stars. Though Hux's speech has a lot of intensity, the spectators don't learn anything new about his character, other than he's a firm believer in the First Order. But we kind of already knew that just by the fact that he's a general in the First Order. When analysing Tarkin's scene, we get a better sense of his calm and formal personality with his verbal sparring against Leia. And since she's been uncooperative during her capture, Tarkin decided to threaten the destruction of her home planet to find out the location of the rebel base. Tarkin also uses his cold demeanor and height advantage to lord over Leia, so she knows he isn't bluffing. So Leia says the base is on Dantooine, and though at the time Tarkin didn't know Leia was lying, he moves forward with Alderaan's destruction, because Dantooine is too remote to be a proper demonstration for the Death Star's power. The destruction of Alderaan shows that Tarkin doesn't care about collateral damage or innocent lives. He wants to show the rest of the galaxy what will happen if they ever try to rise up against the Empire, whereas the destruction of the New Republic doesn't reveal anything we didn't already know about Hux. When Kylo Ren is introduced, the similarities between him and Darth Vader are clear as day, and because JJ believed the spectators would compare the two, he decided to add that comparison into Ben Solo's character, so he is constantly trying to make himself exactly like his grandfather, in appearance, reverence, and power. Here's the thing, Kylo Ren is a bad Darth Vader, both inside and outside the narrative. He's introduced as a powerful dark side user, with him being able to stop a blaster shot for a prolonged period of time, and psychically ripping out intel from Poe. But then his abilities are resisted by an untrained Rey, and she later humiliates him in terms of strength and skill. Whatever the reasoning for these defeats, justified or otherwise, it weakens Kylo's intimidation factor because the spectators can't see him as a believable threat to the heroes. And his angry outbursts aren't doing him any favors, since they're intended to deliver a sense of fear because he can go off at any inconvenience, but he actually looks childish. Though Vader was an angry character, his rage was kept in control, and he never had to raise his voice to sound threatening, so people wouldn't know his wrath until he was quietly force-choking the life out of them. Whenever people say they're fans of Kylo Ren, they reference how, unlike other darkside users, there's a present struggle that pulls him towards both the light and the dark. And Kylo's internal struggle becomes even more apparent after he takes off his helmet, when you can see his facial expressions and hear his natural voice. And Adam Driver's performance clearly showcases that Ben is still a boy who doesn't fully believe the words he's saying.
Your son, he's gone. He was weak and foolish, like his father. So I destroyed him.
Now, these negative character traits of him trying to be Vader, his general immaturity, and his defeat by Rey could be beneficial if Kylo grows out of them in future movies and becomes a more threatening villain. But the truth is, he doesn't. He remains excessively angry, he keeps struggling between being good and evil, and he keeps getting beaten by Rey. Personally, I think people like Kylo just because they like his lightsaber.
My blade will destroy you in a single strike. My blade was made from ore, found in the furthest, most forsaken realms. It was then bathed in hot lava for millennia, and forged under a full moon, hammered into perfection by dwarven blacksmiths with autism, so you know it's good.
Going back to Kylo's obsession with becoming Vader, because of JJ's ambiguous plot writing, we never know why Ben Solo reveres Darth Vader. Considering who Ben's parents are, the political system he grew up in, and who trained him, why would Ben Solo, descendant of the galaxy's heroes, idolize one of the biggest war criminals in the galaxy? I know Vader is Ben's grandfather, but did Ben not know how Vader was redeemed and gave his life to save Luke? Or even who Anakin Skywalker was before he became Darth Vader? Amazing pilot, Jedi Knight, and General of the Clone Wars? There's this one scene where Kylo is communing with Vader's helmet, saying he'll finish what Vader started. No idea what that means, and I don't think JJ knows either. But this scene does bring up the question of where Anakin's Force Ghost is. If he's still around, wouldn't he have an invested interest in keeping his grandson away from the dark side? But hey, I guess those are questions for another time, and for another writer to explain. I think the best way to close out this video is by comparing the final battle in both A New Hope and Force Awakens. Going back to my point about the movie moving too quickly, Force Awakens hurries through the planning stage of the attack. We get a brief look at what Starkiller Base looks like, how it works, and where the starfighters need to target. And since key parts of the infiltration and attack plan are improvised, like Han infiltrating the planet through lightspeed, capturing Phasma to lower the shields, Rey escaping on her own, and blowing up an opening for the fleet, there's no tension when the plan goes wrong. In comparison to A New Hope, because the movie goes into detail of the plan to destroy the Death Star, there's a present tension throughout the final battle, as the starfighters are the only ships capable of flying past the Death Star's defenses. So when they get shot down, their chances of destroying the Death Star decrease. The tension in the Starkiller Base attack also gets undermined since there are other plot points going on that take the spectators away from the fighter attack. Rey's reunion with Finn, Han meeting Ben, Han's death, and then a lightsaber fight. It's only after all of that the starfighters blow up the base. Had there been more cuts between the two groups and a better diegetic clock for how long they had before the base fired, there would have been a better sense of urgency. In A New Hope, everything revolves around Luke blowing up the Death Star, The cuts to Yavin Base and Tarkin both exclaimed in a diegetic way how soon the Death Star would be in position. Darth Vader joining the dogfight and chasing down Luke as he's trying to get a shot off. And Obi-Wan's spirit telling Luke to use the Force so he can make his 1 in a million shot. Finally, the lightsaber fight is a pretty mixed bag. Say what you will about the prequels, they did set a new standard when it came to lightsaber fights in terms of skill, energy, and style. So, when comparing those fight scenes to what we see in the whole sequel trilogy, there's a difference in quality in terms of how much training the actors were given and how much thought was put into making the choreography look real. Though I am willing to give the choreography in this fight a pass, because Kylo is injured and both Finn and Rey are untrained, there are also instances where a combatant has an opening on their opponent and doesn't take it to prolong the fight. And considering how much Finn and Rey hate Kylo after watching him kill Han, the severity of Kylo's injury, and the life-threatening condition Finn ends up in, I'd imagine all three of them would want to end the fight as quickly as possible. There's also the issue of how many lightsaber strikes characters endure, because in previous films, lightsabers were established to be so dangerous that even the shallowest of cuts could incapacitate an opponent, and that required an immense amount of precision to pull off, otherwise that opponent would die. So yeah, this was the fight that started the meme of Disney nerfing lightsabers. Had the trend ended with this movie, Kylo would probably appear quite durable considering the damage he took, but unfortunately this became the standard for lightsaber damage, and it makes the final battle even less tense. Based on the obvious similarities to A New Hope, and how The Force Awakens completely misses the mark on Star Wars' fidelity, JJ either hadn't seen Star Wars in years and was just writing the script from memory, or watched A New Hope right before writing and just didn't get it. And whatever original ideas JJ introduced, like the main character being a stormtrooper or having tension within the villain's hierarchy, the script doesn't follow through on those ideas because it's too focused on showing the spectators what they've already seen. It's also not possible to treat The Force Awakens as its own movie, because its narrative is dependent on the spectator's nostalgia for A New Hope. Otherwise, they can't help but spot the many contrivances that push the plot forward. And considering Disney's method of writing a sequel trilogy without a defined direction, and JJ's mystery box writing style forcing the directors after him to do all the hard work, The Force Awakens' longevity was dependent on the success of what came next. So the movie keeps getting worse as time goes on, because without needing to open it, people eventually realize the mystery box was always empty.